This video is presented by mybookie.ag. What's up guys? UFC 251 has finally arrived. Super stacked card, especially that main card. But I'm really looking forward to Makwan Amirkhani versus Danny Henry, as well as Volkanovski gonna be fighting Jiri Prochazka, former Ryzen light heavyweight champion who's finally coming to the UFC. Very powerful, on a great streak right now. Super explosive, super dangerous. It should actually be an amazing fight. But let's start with the first big fight. Jessica Andrade versus Rose Namajunas 2. Rose is finally back. After contemplating retirement, she seems to be better mentally, very prepared for this fight. Whereas Jessica Andrade is coming off that big loss to Zhang Weili. Her first knockout loss in her entire career, and it was done in less than a minute. So it will have to tell you maybe something about Jessica Andrade's mentality might be a little bit different. Her chin may be a little bit different as well, because even in that Rose fight, she was getting cracked and she got dropped in the fight, right? She's taking a lot of damage in her last two. And when you look at how that fight was going, Rose is just dominating from pillar up until she hit the post where Jessica Andrade slammed her. But what do you take away from that fight? Well, the thing is, Andrade just could not see the punches of Rose. She couldn't react to them. She tried, but she was always too slow to get her head out of the way in time. So the straight right was catching Andrade on point. The thing Andrade goes for is that left hook. Her charges start with a left hook. Every time she ducks her head and wings in the left hook to charge the opponent backwards and ram them against the cage. Rose is throwing in that straight right, getting on the inside of the left hook, as well as allowing herself to retract quickly and get away from Andrade. She was just way faster and touching up Andrade very well in that first round. And when you notice, Rose just constantly moved out to her left, away from the left hook of Andrade, because she was just very aware of it. She knew Andrade always goes for that same punch to start everything. And when she moved out to her left, either by throwing in that check left hook and then fading out that direction, or just moving that direction in general, Andrade couldn't really hit her. The only thing she could really do was land some leg kicks. Leg kicks were the biggest adjustment for Jessica Andrade in that fight. It started to slow down Rose, allowing herself to get in on Rose a lot better. She actually landed on Rose right before slamming her. A lot of people missed that. She landed one left hook. It was kind of hard to tell if it hurt Rose, how much it hurt Rose, or anything like that, but it did land, which is something that wasn't the norm before the slam happened, you know? So the leg kicks had to have contributed to that. And the other opening for Jessica Andrade is Rose normally was moving straight backwards and not keeping her stance while doing it. She was speed walking backwards, which is very athletic to do. If you could pull that off, you are extremely athletic, but it could put you in so much danger, especially when Andrade starts kicking out the legs. If you start doing that after your lead leg is taking some damage, you're going to be noticeably slower moving away, and potentially some of those hooks will catch, just like one of them did touch her before the slam, you know? So I like to see Rose take a stance moving backwards, kind of like what Valentina Shevchenko would do. Bounce backwards with the stance and move away, and that also allows her to take angles a lot more efficiently, and she won't just be walking backwards, because that's exactly what was happening. Walking in a straight line backwards to the cage, which is where Andrade wants her, and then she would throw a check left hook once she got close to it, and then take off an angle, which is expending a lot of energy. You don't want to be that close to the cage, because that's where Andrade is going to shine. Andrade goes for that high crotch every single time, and she knows she can knock out Rose Namajunas, but Rose had that solution, quote-unquote solution, with the Kimura, which was working. She lost the grip when she got knocked out, so potentially we could still see something like that from Rose Namajunas. I mean, it was artistic the way she was pulling that off and almost got an armbar off of it, so it absolutely can still work, but it's just so risky to do because you're relying on your grip strength at that point. Jessica Andrade is also a lot stronger, right? She could tear apart your arms a lot easier than most fighters can in this division, you know? So that's a bit of a risky move. The best thing for Rose is just not be on the fence at all. Don't even go past the black lines, and that requires her to stop speed walking backwards. So my prediction for this fight, I'm gonna go with Rose Namajunas again. I think she can carry on what she did for the first round and a half and just keep going with that and not make some of these bigger mistakes. Possibly some more head kicks, some more side kicks above the slow leg kicks of Andrade, because Andrade does telegraph them a bit. So Rose, using her Taekwondo background, she can absolutely use a lead side kick to counter some of those leg kicks of Andrade and catch her to the body, to the head, and knock her on her back. Also, if you do remember, Rose did take down Andrade. I believe it was a double leg takedown, but she did almost what TJ Dillashaw does with that outside trip with it, and that got Andrade to the ground. So potentially she could use that, some takedowns, as an answer to some of the leg kicks of Andrade, because Rose is a far higher level grappler if it gets to the ground. So we could potentially see more of a wrestling style, more of a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu style, as well as the boxing style of Rose. Hopefully some more kicks too. So I'm going to go with Rose. I'm going to go by a third round submission. Rear naked choke. And then we go to the first title fight. Among the hardcore fans, this is an extremely anticipated fight. Petr Yan versus Jose Aldo for the vacant bantamweight title. There is no champion in this division currently. Now, there are a couple key things you got to know right off the bat, some background information. Jose Aldo is way more experienced. Like, it's not even close. Petr Yan hasn't really fought any big ranked contenders. The best ranked opponent he's ever beaten was Jimmy Rivera. Other than that, he fought John Dodson and he fought Uriah Faber, so the level of competition and the amount of high-level competition beaten, they are not even on the same realm. Jose Aldo is one of the greatest fighters of all time. Personally, one of my top 5. He's fought featherweights, he's been 5 rounds many times. Petr Yan's never been to the 4th and 5th rounds before. Jose Aldo probably knows how to pace himself a lot better, but Petr Yan brings a level of pressure that Aldo has historically succumbed to a bit. Aldo is very dangerous for the first 2 rounds, no matter who he's up against, other than maybe Conor McGregor. Even against very pressuring and high-volume punchers, he tends to usually, with a full training camp, be a very dangerous opponent and win those early rounds. Petr Yan is one of those fighters as well. He puts hard pressure on his opponent, lands with combination punches. He systematically just gets better throughout the fight. Petr Yan is a better 2nd and 3rd round fighter than he is a 1st round fighter because he downloads the data and he slows down the fight a little bit for the 1st round just to see what you're doing, just to see your tendencies, because the way he puts together combinations, it needs time to get the hang of. It needs time for him to get used to things before he commits with these artistic, perfect form combinations. I mean, we're talking about left high kick to right straight jab combination. We're talking about that Dustin Poirier combo. He throws a jab, right hand, switch steps, creates a different angle for a counter shot of the opponent, and lands a straight left hand. He does this against everybody he fights, every single opponent, just like Dustin Poirier does. It's a little bit different, but the same kind of combination. Jose Aldo is 100% going to expect that same combo that Petr Yan dropped Uriah Faber with, they landed on Jimmy Rivera with, they landed on John Dodson with. He's going to expect that same combination coming into this fight as well. Petr Yan's amazing in the clinch. He has great trips from there, great elbows from there, great knees from there. He's a very well-rounded fighter. He boxes for the most part, and he has really good takedowns, but I don't think the takedowns are going to matter too much because we're talking about Jose Aldo, the best anti-wrestler in the game. There's nobody on his level when it comes to stopping wrestling. I see this fight being a striking match, mostly a boxing match, and that is where specifically Jose Aldo has to do more. I think Petr Yan's a better boxer. He's more skilled. He can match some of the speed of Aldo. I think Aldo's just a little bit faster. He may be more powerful as well. It still depends because we haven't seen Aldo's power at 135 able to hurt opponents. He did hit Marlon Moraes pretty clean with some of those counter shots, especially that counter right hand moving backwards, but it wasn't enough to hurt Marlon Moraes, So I don't know if his power has decreased. There are still unknowns about Aldo going down to 135. But technically, he does have some things that Petr Yan may find a little bit troublesome. One, the leg kicks, of course. Petr Yan's a boxer. He leans on the front foot a lot and punches over his knees. When he's throwing punches, a lot of the time, he's leaning forward a little bit too much. And that causes him to be a very offensive forward fighter. When you're leaning forward on punches, it's extremely difficult to move backwards. And that allows maybe Jose Aldo's legendary counter left hook to connect, as what Namajunas did to Jessica Andrade for the entire fight, check left hook and fade out to the left. Jose Aldo's pivoting is among the best in the sport. And when someone like Petr Yan has a forward trajectory motion going, Jose Aldo pivoting off the center line can be extremely problematic for Petr Yan to deal with. And something else a lot of people are not taking into consideration is Aldo can wrestle. When he wants to wrestle, he can offensively shoot him for takedowns extremely quickly. He has a very underrated blast double leg. He displayed this in the Korean Zombie fight extremely well. And the fact that he has trained with Petr Yan in the gym, maybe he knows he can possibly take down Petr Yan, knowing how good of a striker Yan is, take him to the ground and dominate on the ground. Maybe that's what the rumors are about. Maybe it's not about the striking in general. Maybe it was the grappling. We don't know that. But we know Aldo from the past. When he wants to go for takedowns, he is very hard to stop. And that forward trajectory, heavy leaning boxing style of Petr Yan, he can get intercepted by a blast double leg from Jose Aldo. And on the ground, it can get very interesting. This can cause Petr Yan to change up his combination striking a little bit, where he's not chasing Aldo as much. Because that's where a lot of fighters create a problem for themselves, where they chase Aldo. Other than Max Holloway, who's longer and taller, guys who are about the same stature or, around the same size as Aldo, they have a very hard time chasing him down. They usually do get countered. Just like Marlon Moraes, Frankie Edgar, Chad Mendes, Ricardo Lamas, etc., they usually get countered by that straight right hand, a jab, or a check left hook. And quickly, they find the speed of Aldo is a bit difficult to deal with. And that is something that Petr Yan has to deal with because John Dodson rocked Petr Yan at one point. He did a very similar thing. He moved away from Petr Yan's attacks, he rebounded off the cage, and hit him with a quick left. And that is because the forward trajectory of Petr Yan. He moves forward a little bit too much when he attacks. He gets in too hot. And when you get in too hot against Jose Aldo, you might just get some third-degree burns, man. And with that, I like to see Jose Aldo throw a lot more kicks, leg kicks, head kicks, body kicks, get into the clinch more because he's not going to be worried too much about getting taken to the ground. Even if he gets taken to the ground, I believe Aldo's a better grappler. This is the time to possibly switch up the game a bit from his boxing style that he's fallen in love with, you know? And probably the most important aspect of this fight that is unknown to all of us is the fact that they trained together in the past. This was years ago. Eduardo Dantes has said that Jose Aldo got the better of Petr Yan, pretty much alluding that Jose Aldo did what he wanted with Petr Yan in the training room. Yan was young, he was small, but that mentality, going up against a guy and training with him and getting dealt with, can possibly play a trick on their mind when they go up against them. It could possibly motivate them better than ever before. He might see Aldo as, you know, the star in front of him, like he'll freeze up a bit. He might chase the knockout and gas himself out or get caught. He might be a little bit too tentative. It's hard to really see, and that can also go for Jose Aldo. He might underestimate Petr Yan. You never know. He's felt him before. He felt his strength before. He felt his power before. He's been in front of his style before. And maybe he knows he could deal with this so well, he might even underestimate him at this point because Petr Yan's gotten a lot better, of course. And also, there is no crowd, so it's going to mimic a lot of the training room. It's going to mimic more of a sparring match than it would be on a grand stage in front of a roaring crowd, you know? So that goes right to my prediction. I think it's a very hard fight to call, but my prediction for this fight, I'm going to have to go with Petr Yan. I really do want to go with Jose Aldo. He definitely does have a chance of winning this fight, but the difference here is I actually think the skill of Petr Yan's counterpunching is not going to allow an aggressive Aldo who's looking to attack to land meaningful strikes at all, because Petr Yan's counterpunching is very underrated, actually very much overlooked. He is way more vulnerable with his forward attacks, with his aggressive attacks, than he is counterpunching. His counterpunching, in my opinion, I might be in the minority here, but I actually think his counterpunching is more polished than his aggressive striking. I'm going to go with Petr Yan. It's very close, and I'm actually going to go by a 4th round TKO. And then we go to the co-main event. Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway 2 for the featherweight title. Their first fight back. It's an immediate rematch of a fight where Volkanovski, for the most part, just outpoint Max Holloway, able to switch stances very well. The leg kicks were a huge factor in their fight. He was punching with Max Holloway at times, which is what Dustin Poirier showed everybody what you kind of have to do at this point. You're able to overpower him, you're able to land harder than him, and he disengages and stops his momentum from building if you exchange with him. And when they weren't exchanging with each other, Volkanovski was just kicking the legs. He was just adding points. To be honest, I actually don't see many differences happening here. Maybe if Volkanovski able to hurt Holloway here and catch him with some more things, maybe adds a few wrinkles to his technical striking game. From there, he may have a more convincing win this time. And here's a big thing. Max Holloway didn't even spar. It's the first time in his entire career where he has not sparred in his training camp, and he'd even trained directly with his coaches. He trained over Zoom. Yes, the app where you talk to each other through a camera. That sort of thing. He wasn't even physically training with his coaches. Were they just hitting a bag? Is that what this all entailed? Like, that's bad. That's really bad. He needs to make some real adjustments for this rematch because he tried everything he does against opponents except throwing a lot of kicks. He didn't throw that many kicks in the fight. That's something I'd like to see him throw more in this one. More spinning back kicks, more round kicks, more side kicks to the knee. Be the longer guy because the arm reach is very close. Max Holloway has short arms. He needs to use his leg reach advantage here. He needs to start using kicks and use his movement a lot better than before and know when to be aggressive and when to counter away, but I just don't think it's going to work. Whenever he goes forward, I think he's going to get overpowered. I think Volkanovski is going to attack with him and get the better of the exchanges. If he stays far away, I don't see much of what he can do differently to stop the leg kicks from happening and distinguish what's going to be a leg kick and what's going to be a punch to the head. Because of the feints of Alexander Volkanovski, they just don't stop. It's hard to tell whatever he's going to try to do. It's something that happened to Jose Aldo as well. He froze up Jose Aldo because of his feints. It's very hard to tell what Volkanovski's trying to do. Unless you go to war with him, like Chad Mendes did, there is no feints that really get thrown out there. It's just pure chaos. But Holloway just doesn't have that ability to go to chaos and brawl it out with a guy like Volkanovski. So my prediction for this fight, I gotta go with Alexander Volkanovski, and I'm gonna go by another decision win. I think Holloway's chin is just among the best in the UFC, and I do not see him getting submitted. It's gonna be hard for him to get taken to the ground. I think it's gonna be very similar to the last fight, but way more convincing for Volkanovski, maybe even stunning Holloway here and there due to the lack of training. And then we go to the main event, the most anticipated fight on this card for most. Kamaru Usman gonna defend his belt against Jorge Masvidal, who was the original opponent. He was replaced by Gilbert Burns, who I personally still to this day think it's the most challenging fight for Kamaru Usman. Then Jorge Masvidal replaced the replacement, and we're back to the original fight, but with Jorge taking this on 6 days notice. Don't get that mistaken though, Jorge has been training, right? He was training for Usman before the negotiations happened, 100%. It wasn't a full training camp, it was an extended period of training. I'm pretty sure he continued his training because he says he's always in the gym. So he's not going to be like other fighters who take a fight on short notice and they're just not there. Like, they're not ready for it. They're not ready to go 5 rounds and all that stuff. I don't know if Jorge is able to go 5 rounds in this one because you have to know when he fought Nate Diaz, he was tiring a bit. It wasn't like he was ready to gas out and roll over, but he was breathing heavy and he seemed to be tiring a little bit. I think he would have went 5 rounds and finished through the rest of the fight. But he was fighting Nate Diaz and he had a full training camp for it. Now he's fighting Kamaru Usman, who puts on one of the most ferocious paces in the UFC, the only guy up to this point able to go from pillar to post with Colby Covington at the exact same pace and never slowing down. Also, he's bigger, stronger, has a wrestling style, grinding style, very exhausting style compared to Nate Diaz. You know, so this is very, very different. Even if Jorge was ready for 5 rounds, he had a full training camp, it'd still be tough for him to keep up with Usman the whole fight. I think he could, but it would be very difficult. 6-day notice, not a full training camp. He's weighing 190 pounds. People say he seems to have a gut, but he always looks like he has a gut, even in the ceremonial weigh-in. So I don't take too much out of that, but he did have skinnier arms and stuff. So for sure, he's not in the best shape. And that is a bit worrisome when you're fighting a guy like Kamaru Usman, because Usman's going to go 5 rounds hard. Like, there's no slowing down. There's no easy time with Kamaru Usman. You're going to have to be ready to grind it out for 5 rounds when you fight this guy. So that's going to put Jorge Masvidal in a very different mindset. I believe he's going to be way more aggressive in this one. I think he's going to try to initiate the exchanges, initiate the striking right away from the get-go. I don't think he's going to want Usman at all to dictate the pace of the fight, dictate the pressure, get going with his aggression. Jorge is going to be the one to bring the fight to Usman. And that actually is something a lot of fighters don't do. The only 2 fighters that were able to do that, and they're actually the only 2 fighters that were successful against Usman, were Emil Meek and Colby Covington. I made a few videos breaking down this fight, and maybe you've heard this before, but Emil Meek and Colby Covington are the only 2 fighters who had any success on the feet against Kamaru Usman. And what did they both do? They brought the fight to him. They didn't back away and became a matador to the bull that is Usman, because it's very hard to find the opening when you do that. Now he can strike with you, he can box with you, he has a long reach, he's going to keep you at the end of the reach, and even worse, he has some of the most threatening takedowns in the welterweight division. There's too much of a guessing game when you're moving backwards. You want to move forward and eliminate the guessing game entirely. You want to be the one who has to force Usman to answer some questions, to guess his opponent. That's what fighters have to do to him, just like Meek did and just like Colby Covington did. And when they were able to do this, there were times in the fight where he froze up a bit in front of the fire, especially against Emil Meek during a few moments in the fight. And those fighters aren't near the same kind of striker that Jorge Masvidal is, and more importantly, they don't have the same kind of killer instinct. Emil Meek may have near the power, maybe even more power than Jorge Masvidal, but the killer instinct with the precision, knowing when to strike, knowing where to strike at what moment, that is something that Jorge has over most fighters in the UFC. And he has developed that attribute before he was even a professional athlete, when he was participating in backyard brawls against your neighbor. And when you bring that to Kamaru Usman, if Usman makes mistakes, if he freezes up under the fire, even for a split second, because that's all it takes, if he starts reaching forward for a takedown like a lot of wrestlers do instinctively, or he throws some haymaker of a punch or something like that and Jorge is able to evade it, Usman's gonna be in trouble, man. And the only real thing Usman can do against Jorge Masvidal when he's getting pressured, or when he's meeting a charging Jorge that's coming at him, is just go for that double leg, or just shoot him for a takedown right away, trying to make it a wrestling match at that point. And the reason why that's his most viable option is because he doesn't want to go in the clinch, especially early with Jorge. Jorge is extremely dangerous in the clinch. Look what he did to Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz is an underrated clinch game where he's able to take advantage of Conor McGregor and make it a close fight because of the clinch, able to beat Anthony Pettis because of the clinch, and Jorge tore him apart there. But some people will say that Usman's bigger and stronger and more powerful, all that stuff in the clinch, right? So was Cesar Ferreira. Cesar Ferreira is bigger and stronger than Kamaru Usman, and he met Jorge in the clinch and got torn to pieces. This quality can diminish a bit if the fight carries out and Jorge is of course just tired. Then Usman is for sure gonna get the better of the clinch and eventually might even finish Jorge Masvidal or bring it to a very dominant 4th and 5th rounds. Now, this all only really matters if Jorge's moving forward. If Jorge is not moving forward, if he doesn't force exchanges and be wary of the counter takedown whenever he's moving forward, where he can start countering with knees and tie plums and keep some separation between the two, if he's the one moving backwards and Usman is able to put him against the cage and march him down and all that stuff, this is going to be another Usman classic, right? It's going to be exactly what he did to Tyron Woodley, what he did to RDA, what he did to Damian Maia, and he can absolutely do that to Jorge Masvidal because there's something about Jorge Masvidal when he gets pressured, he has very good defense. He has a very good slipping ability and he's amazing at blocking shots, but he tends to get lazy a bit. And even to this day, even his very last fight against Nate Diaz, there would be times where Nate's charging him forward with long stretch combinations, and Jorge would block the first, slip the second, and then he brings his hands down to his hips, and then he just gets caught by the next two. It's so strange to see, and then he smiles after. And he's done this in the past as well. I don't like to say the word lazy because it can give a negative meaning to it, but I don't know how else to describe it. When he was in the lightweight division, and he was just constantly going to the decision and not really pressing the trigger, offensively and defensively, he would just do enough to win, even if there were openings for him to take advantage of. And that still is part of him to this day. Now it's more defensively than it is offensively. He still has some of the defensive, lazy qualities that he's always had before. Not at the same level, of course. He's much sharper defensively now, and he's much more willing to go for things. But there's still that minor lapse of realization in his fights that he can get caught at any given moment. There's still that part of him. It might even have been a reason why he got caught by Darren Till, but it was 100% shown when he fought Nate Diaz in very slight moments. And Kamaru Usman is not a guy who you want to take a straight right hand from. He can absolutely knock you out with one of those straight right hands. And the bigger thing is, if he allows that to happen, if he gets pushed back and brings his hands down and gets caught once, Usman is the kind of guy who'll string 3, 4, or 5 punch combinations, and whenever you're trying to go for your own counter shot, that big punch to get him off you, he's already on your hips. He's already on your legs to take you to the ground, and now the ball starts rolling. So that goes right to my prediction for this fight. I think it's closer than people think. Way closer than my bookie is giving it. I mean, Usman's almost a 3-1 favorite. And some of the mannerisms that they're giving out, Jorge is extremely confident where he's not really giving Usman any credit for anything. Whenever he's done that, he's knocked the guy out foolishly, like Ben Askren. Every other fighter, Nate Diaz, Darren Till, Stephen Thompson, Damian Maia, everybody, he has given credit to their skills. Everybody. Just not Usman and not Askren. He's calling them both bums. It might be because they're wrestlers. That might be the reason he just hates that style that they have. Even though Usman delivers a lot of damage in his fights. But there's something about that mentality of his, that mannerism of his, whenever he's that confident, where he literally believes that his opponent has nothing for him to be worried about. It makes the fans also share that same confidence that he's going to win. And I see it as well. I feel it as well. There's always just that feeling you have about a fight, like something's going to happen that you did not expect. And that is why MMA is so exciting. You never know what's going to happen. And then when you look at Kamaru Usman, he's already talking about the excuses that Jorge has set out there. Right? He's saying, he already has excuses. People are not going to give me credit for the win. So Usman is extremely strong mentally. So I'm not going to say he's not as confident as he should be, but there is some questionable things he's been saying. As well as he just said he ate a bunch of food on Friday and gained a bunch of weight. And in his last interview, he looked really skinny. I don't know what happened there. That is the mental side of the fight, which is actually way more important than the physical and the skills and stuff. And that is just ultimately no fans know anything about. My official prediction, I can absolutely be wrong here. I'm going to go with Kamaru Usman. I know it's a safe pick, and I'm usually the one that goes with the risky picks. And Jorge is probably my favorite fighter in the UFC to watch. Jorge can win this fight. Absolutely. And that is the beauty about short notice fights. These giant upsets happen when these short notice fights take place. And that can give a lot of opportunity when you go and bet on the fights with mybookie.ag. No one gives you better lines and more ways to win than they do. You can go by knockout, submission, decision, even a draw, what round is going to happen. You can bet on anything about the fight. How many rounds it's going to go in general without picking an actual winner. And when you actually go in deeper and look at some of these fights, when you look at the Rose Namajunas versus Jessica Andrade fight, for an example, look at the odds of a knockout happening or a submission happening, something like that, where these fighters are extremely explosive, and they usually win their fights by finish, a lot of people just believe it's going to go to a decision. Because of that, there's a lot of opportunity to maximize your earnings. And if you're the kind of person who likes to bet a little but win a lot, you could try a parlay. Just put up a lineup of fighters that you are confident in winning, and through that you can multiply your winnings. All you gotta do is go to mybookie.ag and sign up for the deposit bonus. You get a first free deposit bonus where MyBookie will match up your first deposit halfway all the way up to $1,000. That means if you deposit $200, you get $100 in free money to play with. All you have to do is use the promo code WEASEL to activate this offer. That is promo code WEASLE to take advantage of MyBookie's sign up offer. Sign up with mybookie.ag today, where you bet, you win, and when you win, you get paid. And when you look at the betting odds here, so Danny Henry is a big underdog against Makwan Amirkhani, who has not been performing that well in his recent career. Danny Henry is a better striker, I believe. Makwan's a bit faster, he's more athletic, and he's a better wrestler. But Danny Henry has a very dangerous submission ability. He's very tough, he's long and tall, and he has some underrated power, where Makwan cannot keep up 3 rounds that well, and I could definitely see where Danny Henry gets the victory here. I absolutely think Amanda Ribas is going to be Paige Van Zandt, but almost an 8-1 favorite is a bit out there, man. Paige is still athletic. She has good attributes. She's very aggressive, and she does overpower a lot of her opponents. So definitely not 8-1 favorite for sure. Amanda Ribas should win the fight, but that's some crazy odds. And I pretty much agree with the rest of these. So I hope you guys enjoyed the predictions. And if you did, make sure to thumbs up. If you enjoyed my content, make sure to subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next video.